At the start of the movie, a man lies on his back repeating phrases to himself. Inside an England Veterans Club in 1980, a man called Eric Lomax is made fun of by his friends for his collection of out-of-date railway timetables. He tells them that he has a small problem they might find interesting. Eric begins narrating the previous Thursday when he was trying to return a book. He's late for his train, so he takes another one that's on its way and meets a woman named Patty. She talks about the various places she's excited to visit. As Eric attempts to guide her through his knowledge of the ports and roads, he gets flirtatious, talking about romantic coasts and wondering if she's interested. She tells him she has to be in Edinburgh by Wednesday. They don't exchange contacts before departing, but Eric continues to narrate that he had fallen in love with her. The eager men listening to him in the Veterans Club ask him what his next move is. Eric excuses himself and leaves, rushing to the train station. He's relieved to see Patty. He admits that the fact he's about to board the train that just dropped her off and terminates there isn't all that coincidental, just as she acknowledges that she isn't particularly surprised either. He invites her into his house and offers to make her a meal. Impressed by his gentle and hospitable nature, she kisses him. In a dreamlike sequence, the two of them are seen enjoying their lives in each other's embrace. They then get married, as Eric's veteran friends salute him. Patty tells him she's happy. Laying on his back in his honeymoon suite, a Japanese soldier startles Eric. He tells him to put on some clothes and keeps him walking until they reach an area where more Japanese soldiers circle them. Eric begins to panic when he sees a particular room, screaming for them to let him go. He tells them the war's over, to which he's told he's an exception. It is then revealed that the Japanese soldiers never came to his suite, and he's having a nightmare. His newlywed wife runs out of the shower to see him on the floor, crying as if he's in pain. The scene then changes to Eric standing on the shore, his brain transporting to Singapore in February 1942. Young Eric and his friends listen to the soldiers screaming into the radios before their general interrupts them, telling them the orders are to cease fire, but they're still an active unit, so they can start destroying anything that might be valuable to their enemy. Before leaving, Eric takes a material he intends to use later on. As they leave the place, they see the Japanese take down Britain's flag and replace it with their own, claiming that it's the fall of the British Empire. The young soldiers are then counted and boarded on a train, hiding in between them various pieces of a radio. Eric and the Japanese general from the honeymoon nightmare earlier, namely Nagase, stare at each other for a moment. Through an open window, Patty watches her husband reflecting at the shore. Once he returns, she opens the blinds and starts organizing the house in an attempt to make him feel better. Eric is dormant though, leaving her to talk to herself while she's still in the process of getting used to the house. At night, a sleepless Eric walks out of the bedroom as his wife follows him. She returns to her room once she sees that he's standing at the door. The next day, he reorganizes the house, claiming that he prefers things the way they are and she should never interfere with matters that don't concern her. In Eric's office, as she looks for him to ask if they're missing any bills, Patty discovers a sketchbook filled with various drawings of Japanese soldiers torturing the British ones. Walking into a dimly lit room in the house, Patty opens the closet where Eric's uniform back when he was on duty hangs alone. Suddenly, the door is knocked and men from debt recovery ask Patty if she's aware of the debts her husband's been avoiding, as her husband listens from inside, tensing up. The men, who already attempted and failed to communicate with Eric multiple times, insist on entering the house regardless of Patty's resistance. Upset by the commotion, Eric leaves his desk holding onto a dagger. To him, he can only see Nagase leaving the small room in his nightmares. He rushes to attack the men, but they manage to make him drop the dagger before he can hurt anyone. Walking behind Eric at the shore, Patty begs him to talk to her, to which he doesn't respond. She tells him that they can't live this way. Patty parks her car at the Veterans Club where her husband participates. She takes a quick peek as they're going about their businesses, but her presence grabs their attention immediately, making her refrain from entering. After the veterans leave, Patty approaches Mr. Finley, asking him what happened to Eric. He tells her to ask to hear the story from the man himself. She insists that he tells her, claiming that her husband can only get as far as the fall of Singapore and then shuts down, leaving the part about the railway. She goes on to talk about her 20-year-old duty as a nurse, leading her to see so much suffering. Mr. Finlay refuses still, claiming that men like him and Eric should just be left to cope with their past, which angers Patty. She agrees that war leaves a mark but shouldn't be the reason why any of the veterans suffer in silence. She scorns Mr. Finley for being determined to live his life miserable and declares that Eric and her won't live that way. Mr. Finley, realizing Patty's stubbornness, begins to talk. He tells Patty that Eric couldn't handle it even after his return, so he joined the colonial service and built a dam in Africa. He remembers Eric writing to him about the bad railway system and the demand for more engines and rolling stock, but only the Japanese had the right kind. When Eric came back, He'd just sit alone in these veteran meetings in silence. He went around the country collecting railway memorabilia, which Mr. Finley assumes this is how he met Patty. He expresses Eric's life as being closely associated with trains. In a hazy memory, Eric is seen inside the train where he and the others were put into. He creates a small opening for some air and sees a palm tree burning at a distance. The train thumps to a halt and Eric sees a few locals selflessly offer the captured soldiers water until the soldiers violently throw them away. Eric and the others are then exited from the train and forced to walk into the forest where many captures are taken as slaves of labor. The next day, the 10 British soldiers stand in line as a Japanese soldier tells them they're lucky for being engineers, since that means they'll get to work for the Japanese army, having a better experience than those facing danger up the line. At night, the British soldiers debate on whether they should fight back or work for the Japanese. Eric tells them that this whole idea for an impossibly hard-to-build railway is a barbaric attempt to use the hundreds of armies up the line as slaves. The soldiers agree that this is unacceptable and devise a plan to gather all the pieces of a radio they've shared amongst themselves. They grab everything until the capacitor's the only thing left, and they go up the line where the soldiers are noticeably in a bad shape, one of them being the very major they're under the order of. Eric organizes a map that contains the names of the locations around them that he casually took from the Japanese soldiers and hides it in a beehive. After fixing up a radio, Eric and his friends listen to the news, learning that Hitler's on the run, and Britain, with the help of the US, is raining bombs on Germany. Eric tells the very traumatized and weak general up the line to spread the word, giving him hope. Unfortunately, though, the map that Eric hid in the beehives is gone. He finds out when Japanese soldiers exchange orders loudly and rush through everyone's stuff. He is caught when he goes back there to look for it. The British soldiers are stripped and lined up in the sun. The radio Eric and his team manage to make is brought in front of a Japanese officer. Eric, Finley, Withins, and others are asked to step forward as Nagase and others arrive. A Japanese soldier is ordered to beat down Withins as he screams in pain. His friends watch in horror as their friend is left in the ground with his limbs broken. Slowly, the camera pans to reveal Eric walking towards Nagase and the radio, putting his glasses down next to it and admitting he's to blame. The scene changes to Mr. Finlay telling Patty that it was the bravest thing he had ever seen. Silently, the scene glides into the consequences of what Eric did, which was him being beaten up repeatedly as his friends and other soldiers watch powerlessly. The merciless Japanese soldier wouldn't give Eric a break, which Finlay described as madness. Eric, with both his arms broken, is let to stay with his friends who try to take care of him. But after a week, the Japanese soldiers arrive to inform him of his death and take him away for torture. Mr. Finlay tells Patty that they hadn't seen him for 2 weeks after that. The Japanese soldiers bring his unconscious body back. Mr. Finlay continues to tell Patty that there are certain things that can be too shameful for you to talk about them to someone you love. This gives Patty the determination to try to get closer to Hum somehow. She comforts him, using physical touch by holding his hands as he sleeps. A new perspective unfolds as Eric approaches Patty for a dance, embracing her as we see his despair wash over his face, and the music playing on the radio sounds like war noise. He takes the radio and walks out, slamming the door. Patty reaches out to Finlay again, asking if there could be a better option for what her husband's going through. He finally shows her a newspaper article about Nagase's current location, which is a museum where they were once prisoners at. Patty tells him that she'd stand by Eric's side no matter what he decides to do with this information. Finlay shows the article to Eric. He then asks him what happened in that room, to which Eric has no answer. Finlay asks him to kill Nagase as a means to put an end to everyone's misery. After leaving the train, Finlay hangs himself on a bridge, leaving Patty to be the one who reveals the news to Eric. He doesn't seem to care, which upsets his wife. After Finlay's funeral, Eric finds the newspaper that shows the whereabouts of Nagase. Eric arrives at the museum in Thailand, finding Nagase and following him as he shows the guests around. Eric enters the same compound where Eric was questioned in the War Museum. Eric confronts Nagase, claiming that he purposefully mistranslated his words back then, so Eric would keep getting beaten up. He proceeds to ask him how he survived, being the war criminal that he is. Nagase camouflaged himself as a translator, claiming not to have been involved in anything illicit. Nagase, who still insists that the war was a tragedy, not a crime, goes on to tell Eric of his newfound peace, now that he works in reconciliation and pilgrimage. The angry Eric tries to torture Nagase by breaking his arm, but doesn't get himself to do so. He almost slits his throat with the dagger too, but locks him outside to the small wooden imprisonments and wanders off to the torture room he has nightmares of. Being waterboarded repeatedly, Eric is seen in a hopeless state of pain and discomfort. Nagase kept misleading the officials into torturing Eric more. He leaves the torture room and sets Nagase free, throwing away the dagger and taking a train home to his wife. Patty tells him she thought he'd end up having having the same fate as Finley. He replies saying, "Finley didn't have you." Later on, Eric takes Patty to Thailand, to the War Museum. Nagase approaches them. He gives Eric his sincerest apology and asks him not to let the war haunt them another day. Eric gives him a letter that tells him that, although what happened that day can't be forgotten, he has completely forgiven him. The actual people this movie was based on remained great friends until Nagase's death in 2011 and Eric's death in 2012. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.